Our next session is on mobile journalism, and I'd like to welcome the panel. Will Goodbody, my colleague from RTE, is the moderator for this session, and he will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Now, last but by no means least is a man who describes himself as a news reporter who spends far too much time trying to carry as little kit as possible, which he says he's now whittled down to an iPhone and a set of headphones. He also admits cajoling managers over the years into spending money on gadgets instead of asking for a pay rise. He works for the BBC, where he's predominantly a Radio 5 live reporter, and has also worked for TV. He blogs extensively on his Mojo experiences, one excellent recent example, which I'd urge you all to read, being the pros and cons of using mobile and traditional technology while reporting on the aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris in January. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicholas Garnett.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to RTE for organising this conference. It's great to be among so many inspirational people. We are pretending to be modern. We are pretending to be mobile journalists. As a body of people, we simply aren't. We still spend too much time in newsrooms. Newsrooms aren't the type of place for mobile journalists to be, because stories don't happen in newsrooms. Well, not often.
This is BBC News with me, Julian Warwicker. The headlines in front of a festive newsroom for you.
I try my best to avoid newsrooms in case anyone else fancies a dance. I have two newsrooms that I work from. I go to Salford pretty regularly because we all need new batteries and pens. The most recent time I was in my newsroom in Leeds was at the start of the general election campaign. The last one, 5 years ago. I hope that over the next couple of days we don't all just concentrate on one aspect of mobile journalism, which is acquisition. Getting the material from the real world inside a smartphone. To me, it's what happens next that's interesting. Is it mobile journalism if we capture the footage on a smartphone and then we edit it on a 15-inch MacBook Retina running Final Cut Pro 10? Are we just using what we always use, but with a smaller camera? And most of the time, what's the point of using a camera that, let's be honest, isn't as good as a mid-end DSLR? And if we accept that, then why don't we go the whole hog? And instead of using DSLRs to capture footage, shouldn't we really just go back to a full-spec broadcast camera? They're small nowadays. If the only reason to use smartphones is to save a few £1,000s, then we're doing it for the wrong reasons. Mobile journalism demands that we use one single device for a multitude of uses. Otherwise, we will be walking around like this shoot edit. He works for commercial TV in the north of England. But to use just one device means you have to use a solid workflow that can be put into practice quickly. Because I'm by no means unique. You've seen it already this morning. I will turn up at a story. I'll have 45 minutes to interview, edit, mix, and file a 2-minute package, and then rig the live broadcast as well. People are always surprised that I don't have hundreds of apps on my phone. I really only use 2 for broadcasting. The first one is called Vodio. Neil was talking about it before. Now, I threw away my old audio recorder in 2009 when the iPhone 3GS came out. It was redundant, and so was the traditional way that reporters used to work. BBC Radio Lincolnshire had been recording interviews on a 3G for a while, but it needed a killer app, and in 2009, the forerunner of this one, called Podio, was launched. It was a single-track audio recorder and editor, and if you go on the App Store now, there are thousands and thousands that do exactly the same as that, mostly made by, frankly, very lazy app developers who have replaced an analog recording experience with a digital one and then just given up trying any further than that. But Podio, like all others, is this single-track linear recorder and editor, and Podio then became Vodio. It's a smartphone version of Adobe Audition. You've got 3 tracks of multi-track audio that you can move around, you can mix, you can put sound effects, you can put track on, you can put anything you want on it. Now, as well as audio, it also handles video editing at 25 frames a second, which is very important on this side of the pond. It outputs its files via its very own large file transfer system as well. Cynics say it's all very well in theory, but but in practice it wouldn't work. It's too fiddly to use a phone, even an iPhone 6 Plus. I was in Amsterdam for BBC Radio 4 at a home for dementia sufferers. After the recordings were finished, I started editing on the train back to the airport. I did a little bit more while I waited for the plane, and then a little bit more in the air. Now, as I walked through customs in Manchester, I phoned the producer to tell him the finished 10-minute-long package was in his in-tray. The workflow saved a day and a half of studio time for 3 people, and that is real money being saved. Radio stations are understaffed. At one local radio station, I won't mention the name, the afternoon newsreader is the drive time producer. And at 5 o'clock, she becomes the drive time presenter. She has no way of editing material. She needs the finished piece. Just as a TV shoot edit will file a mixed piece, she needs to have a finished piece. There is no excuse for non-edited, raw audio or video being filed. Now, I'm lucky because my radio station really only does live. The clue is in the name. Back in the 1990s, we used to drive to a location to find a radio van and an operator waiting for us. He would have the kettle boiled, sandwiches were on hand, and cake. These were the glory days. And then the savings came, and we started using satellites. At first, they were frankly massive, but then they started to get slightly smaller and easier to use, honestly. And they eventually got small enough for us to carry in a bag and use all over the world. This is my current one that I use now. It's a Hughes 9202. It has Wi-Fi on it. It's fantastic. But with every minute that you're connected, it costs £3. So you can see why there was a cost reason, as well as a workflow reason, for pushing the use of mobile phones for live broadcast. So now I carry a phone in my pocket. Is it a compromise? Undoubtedly, yes. Does it get in the way of journalism? Yes, it probably does. Does it get easier the more that you do it? Definitely. And there's another advantage. It's quite a good way to make sure you stay as safe as possible. In 2011, during the Manchester riots, BBC Radio Manchester's radio car was attacked. I was standing next to it as it went up in flames. And as the rioters attacked it, the microphone was still on in the back seat. And this is what was transmitted back to the radio station.
Set it on fire, man.
Now, I was standing next to it, talking into my phone, and nobody realized that I wasn't just talking to a mate, I was actually broadcasting. I was using the only other app that I use every day.
Back to Nick Garnett. Nick, you're in Manchester city centre. What's happening now?
They're looting a shop in front of me at the moment. We've just walked past a plasma TV that had been taken out of a cash converter's shop. The rioters in front of me now running because they can see the police coming. The police coming up on 2 directions to try and cut them off. And there are cars coming in rather fast around as well, and police vans coming through. You'll hear the police vans coming past.
Now that app is Lucy Live. It's a VoIP app and it connects over 3G or 4G or Wi-Fi. It allows me to broadcast in broadcast quality from wherever I happen to be. I started using it in 2010. Quite literally, it is a radio car in my pocket. I use it now for about 80 to 90% of my lives. It saves the BBC a fortune. However, you have to be pragmatic. Talk of satellites actually being dead isn't quite accurate. In Paris, in the aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo shootings, I used a combination of iPhone and SatDish. Sometimes, when mobile phone networks were congested, I had to go onto the satellite. There were 35,000 people in the Place de la République. Couldn't get a phone signal at all, but you can broadcast on that. At other times, I had to use my mobile phone when discrete broadcasting was important. I was in the middle of Paris's Grand Mosque, for example. It's not a time or a place to pull a military-grade satellite dish out and start rigging it. A side issue, one of the biggest things that I had to come to terms with in Paris was just how important iPhones have become. Recording, editing, filing, broadcasting, emailing, tweeting, photographing, videoing, phoning. I could hear my iPhone battery crying out in pain. In 4 days, I was on the air over 50 times and received 800 emails. 45 minutes after I touched down in Paris, my battery was down to 20%. So I used this. It's a 22,400 milliampere hour battery, which can charge my phone about 15 to 20 times before it goes flat. And it was the difference between me being able to stay in touch and going dark. Finally, one thing I want to talk about is something I've just been working on, which I'm really excited about. Ebola as a story is an incredibly difficult one for reporters to cover. It's too dangerous to send reporters there, and too expensive as well. So the BBC's health correspondent, Branwen Jeffries, and I sent half a dozen iPods, mini tripods, and cheap personal mics to a variety of medics who were based out there, along with a YouTube training film explaining what a sequence was. The results are absolutely stunning, and they have huge implications for NGOs. Have a look at the work of Dr. Alex Kumar from Leicester.
Well, we did have 2 dresses. Yeah. I'll just find out where the other one is. Yeah.
So, first day at work, I'm sweating. It's hot. It's crazy to be here after spending so much time, of course, reading about it in the news, you know. To be on site and behind that door, well, there is no door, behind that invisible door is probably one of the world's worst viruses in terms of what it does and how it kills people and how quickly it kills people.
And finally, one thing that I want to say is there are dangers in using an iPhone for so many different things. You'd be a fool not to realize that. I was on holiday in Berlin in November on the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. We didn't have a reporter there, and it was obvious to me that we should have done. So I phoned in and volunteered to work it, because I'm nice like that. I had my phone with me and a pair of headphones and a wife who's quite used to me. She didn't seem to mind too much when I was hanging out of the hotel window above Checkpoint Charlie doing a live on Lucy Live at midnight. But she did mind the next morning. When I woke up, I told her I kept dreaming that I could hear voices in my head calling out to me. It had been a worrying night's sleep. And then I opened up the wallet that I use to hold my phone, and I found that Lucy Live was still up and running. And the voices that I'd heard were the studio team back at base shouting at me to stop snoring. I suppose that I do have to be thankful. It could have been an awful lot worse than snoring as they heard. Thank you very much indeed.